Hi, and welcome to the Brookdale Visiting Writer Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker. I'm part of the English faculty here at Brookdale, where I direct the creative writing program. Today on our show, we have Suzanne Roberts, who is the author recently of Almost Somewhere, 28 Days on the John Muir Trail, as well as a poetry collection called Plotting Temporality. So Suzanne, it is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
Almost Somewhere, which is a really funny, kind of empathetic memoir about 28 days on the John Muir Trail. Can you just kind of tell us what it's about?
Yeah, on the surface, it's a book about backpacking. When I was 22, I graduated from college in 1993, and the U.S. was in a recession, much like it is right now. And so my choices were to go back home, which I had a little bit of a difficult home life. My father was an alcoholic, so I didn't want to go home, or get a job, and there were really no jobs. And so I thought, well, what's my plan? To hike the John Muir Trail. So a girlfriend and I decided to hike the trail together, and she was a super outdoors woman who was on our college logging team. And yeah, she was so outdoorsy and so athletic that I knew being a month in the wilderness with her would probably kill me. So I ended up inviting a third woman, and she was the girlfriend of a roommate of mine, and she had a severe eating disorder. And at the time, I didn't know much about anorexia or bulimia, and so I was under the misconception that taking her on this trail would cure her. And she'd never been backpacking, not one single day. So then we finally ended up picking up a fourth, a guy we met in the bar in Mammoth, and he didn't last very long with us, as you might imagine. You know, he's with this sort of bulimic woman, this woman that we nicknamed the Commander, and me, who is unathletic and clumsy and kind of afraid of things. And so we set off to hike the John Muir Trail, which is goes from Mount Whitney to Yosemite. It runs 211 miles along the spine of the Sierra. And
how difficult a hike is it?
Oh, it's a pretty difficult hike. It goes over, if you count Whitney Crest, it goes over 10 passes that are over 11,000 feet. Wow. And you have to sort of time it so you can go over a pass a day, because you can't get stuck up on the passes in the afternoon because there's thunder and lightning, which of course in the book we do confront that. And so you have to hike like 10 or 12 miles a day, and we were not really prepared to do that. It sounded like a great idea when we were packing and planning, and it was a very difficult trip. You know,
What was your experience going into it of hiking? I mean, were you someone who had been hiking and thought, how tough could this be? I was with the Girl Scouts.
Yeah, pretty much. You got it. I had done some backpacking, just sort of weekend trips where we'd hike in, dump our stuff, and lay out on rocks and go swimming, and have campfires. And so I didn't really understand what I was getting myself into. So it was a really difficult trip, and at one point, Dion and I, the woman with the eating disorder, we were ready to hike out and quit. Yeah. But we sort of made a pact and decided we were going to carry on, and so we did. And at the time, I didn't know I'd write a book about it, and so now it's been many years later. I've got a book about it, about the experience.
Well, what brought you to writing the book? I mean, it's a wonderful book, and it's, as I said, it's very funny. I mean, of course, I think you probably hear this all the time, but the funniest parts are sort of at the start when you're really not in shape yet for this. Right. And what was it you called your backpack? You nicknamed your backpack?
I'll get bleeped on TV if I tell you.
Oh, yes.
But Big Haney was the nickname. It was Big effing heinous load.
There we go. You can get away with that. That'll get in the beep.
Yeah.
And there's just these wonderful, great scenes of people who you don't want to say should not necessarily be hiking the trail, but who maybe had stepped into it unaware of what it was.
Yeah.
But you talk quite a bit about John Muir as well, the person and the environmentalist. And I wonder what your relationship with his work was back then, and do you still have it now?
Yeah. I think the relationship's probably deepened since I've studied a lot more. But I got my undergraduate degree in biology. I wanted to study life, and I thought that would get me a career where I could be outside a lot. And I was never really a very good scientist. But I had read many of the male nature writers. Started with Charles Darwin. I'd read Henry David Thoreau, John Muir, Edward Abbey. And so when I went into the wilderness, I was looking for the kind of experience they wrote about, which was this really sort of man in the wilderness, you know, the autonomy and almost the conquering of the mountains and the independence. But I got out there and I realized that I needed a different frame of reference. And I hadn't read any women nature writers at that point. And so I had to really figure out what my relationship to the land was, and that it was okay for me to have insecurities and still keep hiking. It was okay for me to cry on top of a pass if it was raining and horrible, and still keep going. And so when I got back, I ended up going back to graduate school and studying creative writing and literature of the environment, and found all these women writing nature. Isabella Bird, Mary Austin, and they had Annie Dillard. They had all been writing nature. I just hadn't found them yet because nobody was teaching them in my classes yet. And so when I found them, it really gave me permission to write my own story about the outdoors and to explore my own relationship with the landscape. And so I had to go through all of that in order to, I think, write the book.
Well, that's really interesting that the women authors weren't being taught. Did you find it, what was the difference between the way the men approached the subject and women?
You know, I think that it's interesting. Even if you look at, there's books of early mountaineers, and if you look at the male mountaineers, they're all about sort of conquering the mountain and lone man in the wilderness. And even, in fact, many of the men who were with companions wrote as if they were alone. So Edward Abbey, you know, he'd leave out his wives, you know, whichever wife he was with, in the desert. And women, I think, are more apt to write about community and the connection between friends. And the book really, it's about female friendships too, about body issues. It's about a lot of different things. But one of the things it really is about trying to figure out connecting with the land, connecting with yourself, connecting with the people you're hiking with. Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of themes that are very women-centric in the book. I mean, self-esteem, how women are perceived through a masculine society's lens. And there's this girl you're traveling with who is anorexic. And I guess when you looked back at this experience, were these themes that you intentionally wanted to explore in the work, or did they just arrive over the course of writing the book?
They just arrived. Yeah, I wrote, it's interesting because my path to writing this memoir was a very long one and a lot of curves in the road. But I wrote a few books of poems first. And so my relationship to language was sort of capturing moments through observation, which is what I think poetry does. It really deals in moments, and the reflection happens in the reader. Whereas when you write a memoir, you have to unpack it a little bit. The musing and the reflection has to happen in the narrator, and I wasn't maybe ready to do that. You know, when I wrote the memoir.
How long ago did you start it?
Oh, well, this is an interesting story, actually, as someone who teaches at a college. I started it, when I came back, I had to take 2 last classes to finish my degree. And
when you came back from the hike?
Yeah, I had to take 2 more to complete my degree. I was sort of on a 6-year plan. But I took this women in literature class. And the last assignment in the class was write your own piece of women's literature. And that's really where I started reading all of these women, was in that class. And I wrote an essay that became chapter 10. Oh, wow. Yeah. And my teacher was sort of thrilled with it and said, this is so great. Can I use it as an example for other classes? And I thought at that point, that was like a big deal. Like, oh, she likes it so much, it's going to be an example assignment. and so I sort of left it for a while and then did the poetry and all of that. And then I realized that maybe 10 years later that I had a book on my hands.
So had you been working on this all along? Little bits here, little bits there?
Just little bits. And really sort of started it in earnest in 2003. And so I was working on my PhD at the same time, and so anything to get me away from writing the dissertation. I also wrote a couple of books of poems in that time as procrastination. But I started working on it then and finished a draft in 2008.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Is there something you would hope someone would take away from this book?
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of things I would hope people would take away. I think, we've talked about it as being, a woman-centric book, but I also think it's for men too. And and I think a lot of men have read it and liked it, and that's made me sort of happy as well. So I think for me, I would like to see young women obviously read it because of the stuff about body issues and about being out on the trail. You sort of get to forget what you look like. You don't look in a mirror.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time reflecting on the ways in which, as a young woman, I was really concerned with how I looked to men and how ridiculous, really, and how much time I wasted.
Yeah.
So that, but also for just people in general, men and women, I guess what I would want people to take away is this idea that you can do things that you don't think you can do. And the title, Almost Somewhere, comes from this idea that the whole trail, and even in our life, we're always almost somewhere. Sure. And if we keep saying, well, my life's going to begin later, then we cheat ourselves out of living. And so this idea of living in the present tense, which I think doing a long hike forces you to do.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Well, unfortunately, we are almost at our break.
Okay, great.
So we will be right back. I am speaking with Suzanne Roberts, author of Almost Somewhere. Please join us after the break.
Let's defeat asthma!
Join the American Lung Association's fight against asthma. Bring your friends and family and join our asthma walk to blow the whistle on asthma. Together, we'll make asthma a disease we can all live with.
Here are the low monthly payments and interest rate as we promised. Here's where they triple. The rest of this is really just here so that we get your house when you can't pay us back.
Predatory lenders are never this easy to spot. Call us and protect yourself with the facts.
I get to provide the best healthcare experience for our patients.
I get to give students the opportunity to be creative in all areas of the performing arts.
I got my start at Brookdale.
I got my start at Brookdale.
Dude, I dropped my phone. How would you like to save your life from an ugly or reckless driving death? Act now by slowing down, and we'll guarantee you complete satisfaction. Awesome!
There is no spokesperson to prevent reckless driving. Speak up.
Andy, slow down.
Family and friends can provide the support you need to reduce your risk of cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. Eat right and get active.
Hi, and welcome back to the Visiting Writer Series. My name is Suzanne Parker, and I'm talking with Suzanne Roberts on the show today, author of Almost Somewhere, a memoir, and Plotting Temporality. a wonderful book of poems. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks.
We were talking about your memoir before the break, and I'm kind of interested in what the experience of going back and looking at the Suzanne Roberts of her 20s was like for you.
That's a great question. You know, writing the memoir, I had difficulty because I knew that I needed sort of middle-aged Suzanne in the book, looking back, because, you know, my 22-year-old self was insecure about things, was self-conscious, a little bit boy crazy, really drove me crazy as a narrator. And so trying to work in that distance was really important to the book, because I needed the sort of 40-year-old self to be able to talk about the 20-year-old self. And that was one of the most difficult parts for me.
Was it?
Yeah. And you had asked earlier about, did you know the themes were there or did they emerge? And just as they emerged, my narrator emerged. And I got really good advice from a professor, a former writing professor, who said, treat your narrator as if she were your daughter, someone you love, but who just kind of bugs you sometimes. And so that's what I did, and that's kind of how I approached that.
Now, when the book came out, it's done wonderfully. It won the 2012 National Outdoor Book Award. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I have to ask, the other women you hiked with, do they like it?
Well,
do they know it's there?
They do. They do. When it was pretty clear that the book was going to be published, I sent them a draft. And Dion, the one with the eating disorder, you know, I had to ask them if I could use their real names, and I have used their real names. Yes. And Dion said, you know, if my story will help anyone, please use my name. And then Erica, on the other hand, was the one that we called the commander. Yeah, and she wrote me a very long single-spaced email telling me all the things that needed to be changed in the book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But which, of course, ended with which actress should play her, should it become a movie. Yeah. So Erica, you know, if you've read the book. And it was an interesting moment for me in writing Memoir, because I asked my editor what to do, and he said, change your name. But she didn't want her name changed. She wanted her name to be in there, but she wanted me to change these other things. And so some of the things I realized weren't my story to tell, and I cut them. So I did make some changes. And, you know, normally I teach creative writing, and I tell students, don't worry, write what you have to write. And sometimes you write what you have to write, but then later you realize that there's something you may have to cut for publication, because it was true, you know, and she said irrelevant, and I said character development, but at some point there's some things that are your story to tell, and there's some things that aren't. So I did cut a couple of things, and since she's really, you know, she's bought the book for her family, and I've had dinner with her, and she's really supportive of it. So,
that's great. That's great. Now, you're also, you're a travel writer. And you won the, I'm going to get this wrong, but the National Geographic
Next great travel writer.
Next great travel writer, yes. And your travel writing is wonderful.
Thank you.
We love it. And you, can we talk about what you just found out?
Well, it's not that big of a deal, but we can.
Great. Yeah. So you have an essay that's going to be coming out in
Best Women's Travel Writing 2013. Yeah, just found out today.
Which is fantastic. I wonder if you can talk about travel. Its role in your life and its relationship to your writing.
Yeah. Well, you know, I would consider it almost somewhere a travel book.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, it's traveling, a different kind of travel. Traveling
more slowly, maybe. But
traveling by foot. And I have always been really drawn to travel. My mother's British, and so she sort of traveled here, you know, to have me. And so as a little girl, we would go back and forth to England, and I just fell in love with going places, and I feel like when you travel, it's like a way of extending your life, because there's those days where you see so many new things and you take in so much that the day seems like it was 2 weeks long. And I feel like for me, travel is like a way to extend my life, and it always has this sort of profound, I don't know how to say it, but when I'm traveling, I feel like I'm most open to experience, and so I write in my journal constantly, and those moments have become a lot of poems, which the 3 Hours to Burn a Body, my book of travel poems, are, you know, all just based on my experiences of going places. And I'm working now, my next book will be a book of travel essays.
Oh, travel essays. Great.
Yeah, and
Great.
some of them are being published. I do sort of regular contributor to Matador, which is a travel network, and
what's the website for that? Because you can get them online, right?
Yeah, it's Matador Network. You can Google it. I don't know what the URL is, but I write a couple of essays for them a month, and those essays are going to be in my next book.
That's great. That's great. Do you feel that travel has influenced the way you write, like literally the way you write at all? Was there ever a time where, I don't know, you were writing short pieces because that's what the impact of the travel had on you?
You know, it's an interesting thing. I think it's made me have to speed up a little bit. And I don't think I could ever, you know, there are people who are like, I don't want to say real travel writers versus, you know, there's different kinds of travel writing. One is the sort of service, like where to go, what to eat, you know, where to stay. And I don't write that kind of stuff. I write more narrative, try to write essays about my experience traveling. And I've had experiences where I want to write something because I want it to come out in a timely manner. Like I was doing some blogs for National Geographic when I went to Mongolia with them. But I'm not fast. And you kind of have to be fast, you know, because if you're writing about a timely matter in travel, you have to be able to get it out. And I'm still not good at it. So when I was writing these blogs in Mongolia, everyone else would be out like, you know, sightseeing, and I would be like 8 hours in my hotel room trying to get it right. And so if anything, it's made my process a little bit faster, but I'm still by no means fast. I'm not a blogger. I just can't do that immediate thing.
The creative versus the journalist is still...
No, exactly. That's exactly right, yeah.
Now, you also write poetry. So we've got memoir, we've got poetry, we've got prose. I'm wondering how the impulse is different.
You know, I just start writing. I hardly ever try to write in line. Like when I'm writing a poem, I just write. And then I let the piece tell me if it wants to be a poem or it wants to be a story.
So you start your poems just sort of prose?
Just writing.
Just writing.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll get a line that I know is a line, you know? And sometimes that line comes 2 months after I've written a poem and I realize it needs to go in the poem I'm working on. Sometimes it needs to hang around and wait for the rest of the poem to arrive. But I really try to let the piece tell me what it wants to be. And sometimes I write a poem and I realize, no, I need to say more about this. It needs to be an essay. Sometimes I write an essay, and this actually just happened to me. I wrote an essay about Prague, and I thought, it wants to be a poem. I need to cut so much of this stuff, and then it became a poem. So I just let the piece sort of dictate what it's going to be.
What it's going to be and where it's going to go.
Yeah.
Are there places you've traveled to that you found particularly fruitful for your writing?
Yes. India.
Yeah. Why? What was it?
Have you been to India?
I have not. I always wanted to, but I have not.
Okay. India is a beautiful juxtaposition of the most beautiful things in humanity and the most difficult things, you know? And so it's such an old, you know, ancient culture, and it's so crowded. I mean, there's so many people that you have everything there. I mean, you have all of your senses are evoked, you know, because you can hear them chanting from the mosques, and you can smell the incense and the curry, and you see the beautiful, you know, saffron robes of the monks, and you know, and you see the cows walking down the street, and you smell the cow dung, and so it's everything all at once, and that juxtaposition of sort of some ugliness, some sad, really sad things. I mean, there's, you know, lepers begging in the streets, but then there's this incredible beauty, and that they are just all there side by side, and it is everything we are as human beings. And going there was really, really impactful on my writing, and I've written a number of essays and poems about being there.
Are some of those essays coming out in this new book?
Yeah.
And we only have a couple more minutes, but can you kind of describe the book? Are there themes or subjects, the common thread in the essays?
You know, it's really an interesting thing because I was hoping you wouldn't ask this because the new book is always sort of, if you talk about it too much, then it takes its power away from it. And maybe that's just a way of me getting out of saying I'm not sure what it's about yet. And as we talked about with Almost Somewhere, I didn't think, I really want to talk about these themes of body issues and friendship. And I know, I can trust now that as I'm writing this book, the themes will become sort of more apparent. And I know where the book starts and where it ends. It starts with the dissolution of my first marriage and ends with my current marriage, which of course my husband is like, oh no, really? Are you going to be writing about me? But yes, I am going to be. And I know that that's in there. And I also know the idea of being a voyeur, watching and being watched is a theme that's coming out. And this, the struggle I have with travel writing, you can't help but be, it's a little bit imperialistic. Like, here I am, and I'm looking at this place, and I'm an outsider, and I'm defining what it is, and I can never really do that. And so that struggle, too, the struggle of actually getting it right, which I know I never will.
Oh, I disagree, but unfortunately I have to go.
Okay.
So I've been speaking with Suzanne Roberts, author of Almost Somewhere, and if you'd like to know more about the creative writing program here at Brookdale, please do check us out on our website, www.brookdalecc.edu. We have lots of classes open to everyone. So thanks for watching.